Welcome back. We all came to know him as the man who blew the lid on corruption and money laundering in government and ministers receiving cash in Louis Vuitton bags. Angelo Agrizzi took the witness stand at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry last year and trended for weeks after his explosive revelations. Now, he has written a book, Inside the Belly of the Beast, in a bid to expose more corruption. Let's chat about the book now with eNCA bookshelf members, Michael Appel, coming to us from Johannesburg, and Siphamandla Goge, coming to us live from KZN. Now, first of all, of course, Michael, when I read the introduction of this book, I actually realized that Angelo Agrizzi was describing Gavin Watson as this master of a cult, this abusive man. What did you find his explanation of Gavin Watson as?
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, the picture that he paints of Gavin Watson, a man who would lead a company called Jambu and then later what would become Bosasa. And it's quintessential cult leader, a kingpin behind what you must think and how you must act. And he really paints a very negative perception of the man. He does go to great lengths to say, though, that he bought into what Gavin Watson was selling, the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to people, the way he locked you in, basically. You needed to show that there was a certain amount of lengths that you were willing to go to prove your worth to Gavin Watson, and once you were on the inner circle, he would look out for you. So at first he found Gavin Watson this sort of strange, narcissistic cult leader, and later he admits that he bought into it. He looked at, because in the beginning, sorry, I've got the book here in my hand.
We all do.
In the beginning, he worked for a competitor to Gavin Watson, so he only ever heard about Gavin Watson. And he says, he retells a story where he was in the SAA lounge at the airport, and this very loud, arrogant white guy walks in and is talking on his cell phone to make sure that everybody else, yes, comrade this, comrade that, making sure that everybody else in the room can hear what he's saying. And he thought to himself, that must be Gavin Watson, later to confirm that it was. But he bought in. He says, hook, line, and sinker, he fell for Gavin Watson. But we'll get into later how that relationship eventually soured.
And I mean, Sipa, he even goes on, that's Angelo Agrizzi, to say that, for instance, Gavin Watson was this man who prayed and who wanted praying sessions at the office every morning, but at the same time cheated on his wife with this Lindy woman who worked there.
Well, indeed, to add on what Michael is saying, basically this book paints a picture of Gavin Watson as a manipulative fellow. Angelo Agrizzi basically goes all out to say this man was very abusive, very manipulative. He was a control freak. He wanted everyone around him to bow to him, but he would find a very nice way of turning people into believing into what he was doing at that time. He even goes further to mention that in the early hours of the morning, every day at the Bosasa headquarters, they had to pray. And even later on, we read in this book that he believed in God, but he used that as a cult leader, according to Angelo Agrizzi, to get people to do whatever he wanted to do. Even if you didn't believe in what he was asking you to do, you were out. So you had to toe the line. If you didn't, you were out of Bosasa, you were frustrated. So he used his power, he used his money to get people to toe the line. But interestingly, in this book, there is a chapter where I think for me it's where it all started. When they met at that airport lounge, Gavin Watson was on the phone, you know, using this political talk, comrades and all the stuff, saying to people, do these white people know who I am? Do they know what they've done to South Africa? So that tells you about the character of the man. But here in this book, Agrizzi tries by all means to paint a picture of himself being a victim who was manipulated by Watson.
That's correct, and I was going to come to that, book club, bookshelf members, because he goes on to describe himself as, I mean, granted, he did work hard for where he ended up, even when he ended up working for Gyambu from Molefe, for instance. But he speaks about himself as if he was this victim who, for instance, tried to even save Gavin Watson's marriage by always getting his wife flowers on her birthday just in case Gavin Watson would forget. He also uses words such as disgust at the fact that it was becoming normal for them to bribe.
Indeed, and also, you know, taking into account here that we are talking about Angelo Agrizzi, who worked with Gavin Watson for 19 years at Bosasa. So basically in this book, he reveals what he calls is the character of the man who became known in the political and business circles in South Africa. But he says he saved Gavin Watson. But also, interestingly, in the book too, he does concede that there was an incident where his family members were involved in an accident. I think it was in the Eastern Cape, if I'm not mistaken. But he says at some point, and I think that's a fair point to make and to highlight here, he does praise Gavin Watson for saving his family members. When they got to the hospital, his wife was injured, his daughter was injured. So a person who kept on checking on his family, that is Angelo Agrizzi's family now, was Gavin Watson. So it was a strange relationship between the two fellows, but the sense that you get is that here Agrizzi feels betrayed by Watson.
A love-hate relationship, wouldn't you say, Michael?
Sorry, Masego, say that again?
It's sort of describing a love-hate relationship between them, wouldn't you say? I mean, even at some point talking about the SIU and how somebody was always updating Gavin Watson about how far the SIU's investigation was, making sure that Bosasa was one step ahead of investigators. Love-hate relationship between these two.
Yeah, definitely. A very interesting relationship. He seems to, I wouldn't say adore the man, but he certainly has respect for the way in which he has, the connections the man has, the foresight he has, who to make critical connections with to ensure that certain business deals go through. And he was pretty much a fake it till you make it type of person who, even if Bosasa didn't have the services available, they would make all the promises and they would make it happen. But yeah, this forewarning that Bosasa would have that the SIU was busy investigating that was 2009, by the way. That report from the SIU would only surface in 2019. So whoever got their grubby paws on it at the National Prosecuting Authority certainly did a hell of a good job to bury it for a decade. And those charges only cropping up last year. But certainly a man that he latched on to the parts of Gavin Watson's character, the never say die, work until all hours of the morning. And if you showed loyalty, you would get loyalty in return. But it is what you had to do to show that loyalty that Agrizzi says eventually would be the end of that relationship for them.
Siphamandla, also in the book, you find him, Angelo Agrizzi, quoting himself quite a bit. I'll give you one example, for instance, where he quotes himself. He says, "A man can stand up for himself, but it takes a stronger man to stand up for others. Such a man is a rare find." And he goes on to say that was his quote. But what is it, Sipa, that you would say you enjoyed about the book and what you didn't enjoy about the book?
Okay, first of all, we need to be clear here. This is Angelo Agrizzi writing about himself, detailing his account. So whatever you read, you need to take into account that here you are dealing with a self-confessed corrupt racist. In this book, it does concede that, yes, he made those racist remarks in the beginning when he had that conversation with the siblings of the Watsons when they were persuading him not to dump their father. He was recorded, that video or that recording or that audio clip was played at some point where he used the K word. So he does concede that he is a racist, and he does concede that he played his part in this whole corruption that was going on at Bosasa. But just to go back a bit, for me, some of the chapters chapters that stand out for me in this book. They include a chapter where he mentions how Bosasa, when it comes to procurement now, because remember here you are dealing with a company that scored or secured more than 12 billion rand of contracts when it comes to government departments and state-owned entities. Basically, he reveals that it was not surprising because Bosasa was led by people who were politically connected. So whatever bid they wanted to bid for, they will basically draft the specifications and they would send it to the department or to the entity. It will be advertised, but they knew very well that they will get the job. He does write that indeed in South Africa, according to him. It's something that we have heard in the past, but I think it's very shocking hearing it coming from someone who says, I drafted some of the bid specifications for the tenders that we were bidding for. He says in South Africa, when it comes to those big tenders and contracts, it is a known secret that, it cannot be awarded without a preferred bidder being identified prior to that. So for me, when it comes to the issue of procurement, but also one of the things here, Michael touched on it, is the issue of capture when it comes to the SIU and to the NPA. Remember the report that we are talking about here, the SIU report, there was a charge sheet in 2010 that was developed, but it would seem, and also Agrizzi does confirm this, that they had people in the SIU
I'm
and
so sorry.
in the
I
NPA
unfortunately have to cut. Time flies when you're having fun. Of course, we could spend another hour speaking about Angelo Agrizzi and state capture, but thank you very much. Siphamandla Goge coming to us live from KZN and Michael Appel from Johannesburg. Thank you very much for your time.